The grand ballroom of the Whitmore estate glittered with chandeliers, laughter, and luxury. Guests arrived in sleek black cars, stepping out in gowns that cost more than a year's rent, and suits tailored by names only the ultra-wealthy knew. The air was thick with perfume, prestige, and quiet competition. Who wore it best, who donated the most, who mattered most. Among the polished shoes and diamond earrings, one woman stood out, not for her extravagance, but for her simplicity. She arrived alone, stepping out of a modest black car that didn't quite match the rows of Bentleys and Rolls-Royces. Her dress was clean and elegant, but noticeably plain. No sequins, no dramatic cut, no designer label that anyone could recognize. Her shoes were classic pumps, practical rather than luxurious. Her hair was neatly tied back, her face free of heavy makeup. Compared to the glittering guests around her, she looked like she didn't belong. Her name was Evelyn. She entered quietly, handing over her invitation at the door with a soft, "Thank you." The doorman, unsure for a moment, double-checked her name, then waved her in with a surprised nod. A few guests turned to glance at her, then did a double-take. "Who is that?" Murmurs began almost instantly. Did someone bring their assistant? Evelyn made her way through the crowd slowly, her eyes taking in the ornate decor and the clinking glasses. She greeted a few people with a gentle smile, but most guests barely noticed her, and those who didn't know what to make of her. Small group of socialites near the champagne table began whispering. One of them, Vanessa, tall, elegant, and always the center of attention, narrowed her eyes at Evelyn and smirked. "Do you think she got lost?" she said, loud enough for her friends to laugh. "She's probably someone's secretary." Another chimed in, giggling. "Or maybe she's here to clean up after the party." They laughed again, eyes tracking Evelyn as she took a seat near the back of the room. She didn't seem bothered. In fact, she seemed calm, composed, completely unaware or unbothered by the snide remarks aimed in her direction. To the others, it seemed like she had no place there, no designer accessories, no visible entourage, no air of self-importance. She wasn't networking. She wasn't boasting. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. And that, perhaps, was the most confusing part. In a room full of people obsessed with being noticed, Evelyn appeared to want the opposite. Some thought she might be someone's date, a +1 who hadn't been given the dress code. Others were convinced she had walked into the wrong event. But no one could guess the truth, that Evelyn wasn't just an invited guest. She was one of the most important people in the room. They wouldn't learn that until later. For now, they just saw a simple woman and made the mistake of judging her far too quickly. The night carried on, the ballroom buzzing with conversation, laughter, and the gentle clinking of crystal glasses. A string quartet played softly in the background, creating the perfect, elegant atmosphere for the ultra-wealthy to socialize and boast. Evelyn sat quietly at the edge of the room, watching the event unfold. She wasn't scrolling through her phone, or taking selfies like many others. Instead, she observed people, interactions, subtle power plays. Her demeanor was calm, thoughtful, even a little distant. But her very presence was beginning to irritate a few people. Vanessa, the self-proclaimed queen bee of the evening, couldn't help herself. She was used to being the center of attention, always admired, never questioned. And Evelyn, with her quiet grace and simple style, was a mystery she didn't like. Vanessa saw her as an uninvited distraction, someone who didn't belong among the elite. Gathering a few of her closest friends around the dessert table, Vanessa motioned subtly toward Evelyn. "Look at her shoes," she whispered with a laugh. "They look like something from a department store. I didn't even know those still existed." One of her friends giggled. "Did you see her bag? No label? No logo? It's probably handmade. Maybe she's into vintage." Another one added mockingly, sipping her drink. They laughed louder this time, careless and cruel. Evelyn, only a few feet away, heard every word. She turned slightly and met Vanessa's gaze. For a brief moment, silence passed between them, Evelyn's calm, observant eyes locking with Vanessa's cold, mocking stare. But Evelyn said nothing. She simply smiled, nodded politely, and returned her attention to the stage where the evening's speaker had begun an introduction. That reaction, quiet and unbothered, only fueled Vanessa's annoyance. "She's pretending not to care," she said. "But trust me, people like that always want attention. She probably dreamed of coming to a place like this." As the evening progressed, the ridicule grew more blatant. Evelyn approached the buffet table and accidentally brushed shoulders with a man standing nearby. He looked down at her and stepped away sharply as if she were contagious. Behind her, Vanessa muttered, "Careful, she might spill bargain wine on your tux." The others burst into laughter again, but while they laughed, Evelyn remained composed. She quietly filled her plate with a few small items, thanked the server, and returned to her seat. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She didn't lash out, and that unsettled them. Most people in that room would have either fought back or walked out. Evelyn did neither. She sat with the poise of someone who knew something they didn't, someone who had nothing to prove. But the socialites couldn't see that. They were blinded by labels, appearances, and status symbols. They had already made up their minds she was beneath them. Little did they know, Evelyn wasn't just their equal. She was far above them, in ways they couldn't imagine. The quiet woman they mocked would soon become the name on everyone's lips, and the one person they would regret underestimating. As the evening wore on, the gala reached its most important segment, the fundraising portion. The event was, after all, a charity gala, though for many guests it was more about being seen than being generous. The donations served as a kind of social scoreboard. The bigger your contribution, the louder the applause, and the higher your social standing climbed. A tall man in a tuxedo stepped onto the stage. Mr. Langford, the event's organizer, and a well-known name in philanthropic circles. He tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "thank you for coming tonight. We are now entering the heart of our evening, the donation round. All proceeds will go directly to the Children's Education Initiative in underfunded communities." Polite applause followed. A digital screen behind him lit up, displaying donation amounts as they came in. One by one, guests stepped up or waved discreetly at staff to make their pledges. Vanessa, of course, made a spectacle of hers. She raised her paddle dramatically. 50,000, she said, smiling for the cameras. The crowd clapped and someone leaned over to compliment her. How generous. Several other guests followed with figures ranging from $10,000 to $70,000. Each announcement earned respectful nods, applause, and murmurs of admiration. Evelyn remained seated. Quietly, she pulled a small checkbook from her purse. Yes, a checkbook, which alone caused a nearby socialite to chuckle, under her breath. "Who even uses those anymore?" she whispered. Evelyn calmly filled out a check, signed it, and approached a staff member near the side of the stage. She handed it over with a soft, "Thank you," then returned to her seat without fanfare. The staff member glanced at the check, blinked, then looked again. He immediately turned and made his way to Mr. Langford backstage. There was a pause in the proceedings as Langford reviewed the donation. His eyebrows rose. He stepped forward again, his voice sounding just slightly more energized. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just received an extraordinary anonymous donation." The room quieted, attention drawn back to the stage. Langford continued, "A single contribution of $1 million has just been added to our total." 1 million. Gasps rippled through the audience. All eyes turned toward the screen as the number updated in bright, bold text. $1 million. "Who did that?" someone whispered. Heads began to swivel. The camera operators looked around the crowd, trying to spot the donor. But Evelyn remained seated, sipping her water calmly. No clapping for herself, no smug smile. She simply watched the room react. Vanessa stared in stunned silence. Her $50,000 donation now looked like pocket change. Her friends exchanged glances, trying to guess who had made such an outrageous contribution. No one suspected Evelyn. How could they? In their minds, wealth looked a certain way: loud, flashy, attention-seeking. They didn't yet understand that true wealth sometimes chooses silence. Sometimes, it moves quietly, and with purpose. That one check was more than a donation. It was a warning shot, a quiet introduction to a woman they had underestimated, and the real shock was still to come. The atmosphere in the ballroom had shifted. The earlier laughter, gossip, and surface-level chatter had quieted into a hum of curiosity and speculation. $1 million, donated anonymously, was no small gesture. It had disrupted the entire social hierarchy of the room. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know who had made such a contribution, and more importantly, why they hadn't claimed credit. People were now scanning the room with fresh eyes. Was it the tech investor in the corner? The fashion mogul sipping wine near the balcony? No one even considered Evelyn. She sat in the same seat, hands folded gently in her lap, observing the crowd's confusion with the same calm expression she had worn all night. Her simplicity had made her invisible, and that was exactly how she preferred it. But that was about to change. Mr. Langford returned to the stage, holding a card in his hand. His tone was formal, but a smile played at the edges of his lips. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "before we move to the closing remarks, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a guest whose presence here tonight is deeply meaningful to this cause." He looked around the room, pausing for effect. "I've just had the honor of receiving a donation from someone who prefers privacy, but has graciously allowed us to reveal her identity in support of the campaign. Please join me in thanking Ms. Evelyn Hart, philanthropist, entrepreneur, and founder of Hart Global Ventures." The room went still. Then came the audible gasps. All heads turned, some slowly, some in a snap, toward the quiet woman in the back. Evelyn stood not dramatically but with quiet dignity, and offered a slight nod to the room. There were no cameras on her, no spotlight, just stunned silence. The whispers began immediately. "Hart Global Ventures? Wait, that's her? She's worth billions, isn't she?" A few guests pulled out their phones, frantically Googling. Search results confirmed it. Evelyn Hart, self-made billionaire, investor in dozens of successful startups, owner of real estate across 4 continents, and one of the top private donors in global education. Vanessa's expression froze. Her face drained of color as she stared at the woman she had spent the entire evening mocking, the woman she thought was beneath her. Her friends looked equally horrified. Evelyn stepped forward slightly, just enough to be seen. "I didn't come here to impress anyone," she said softly, addressing the room for the first time. "I came to support a cause I believe in, and I've learned that the loudest people in the room are rarely the ones making the biggest impact. No anger, no arrogance, just truth." The applause started slowly, then built into a full standing ovation. But Evelyn didn't bask in it. She simply smiled, nodded again, and sat back down. In a single moment, she had rewritten the story of the night, not with flashy clothes or loud declarations, but with quiet power, humility, and substance. The people who judged her now scrambled to unjudge, but it was too late. The reveal was done, and Evelyn Hart was unforgettable. The applause had faded, but the shock lingered like perfume in the air. Conversations that had once revolved around exotic vacations, luxury handbags, and social media followers now revolved around one woman, Evelyn Hart. Guests stood around, in small circles, their eyes still drifting toward her table. The same people who had ignored or ridiculed her earlier were now desperately trying to remember what they'd said, how they'd acted, and whether they had a chance to redeem themselves. Some even began rehearsing what they might say if they could get just a moment of her time. Vanessa especially was reeling. Just an hour earlier, she had led the ridicule, mocking Evelyn's shoes, her handbag, her very presence. She had been confident, smug, untouchable, but now she felt exposed. How could she have been so wrong, she thought, her face tight with forced composure. Fueled by pride, and perhaps a bit of desperation, Vanessa made her way toward Evelyn, her designer heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Her friends trailed behind nervously, unsure whether to follow or flee. Evelyn noticed her approaching but remained seated, calm as ever. Vanessa stopped a few feet away and offered a practiced smile. "Miss Hart," she began, her voice unusually polite, "I just wanted to say that donation was incredible, truly inspiring." Evelyn looked up at her, eyes kind but unblinking. "Thank you," she replied simply. There was a pause, long enough to make Vanessa uncomfortable. Still, she pressed on. "I hope you didn't take any of our earlier comments the wrong way." "We didn't know." Evelyn raised her hand gently, cutting her off. Not with rudeness, but with quiet authority. "You didn't need to know," she said. "Kindness shouldn't depend on someone's net worth." Vanessa froze. There was nothing to say, no comeback, no smile that could undo what had been said and done earlier. Evelyn continued, her tone calm but firm. "I've spent years in rooms like this, with people who measure value by brands, titles, and bank accounts. I used to think I had to blend in to be respected. Then I realized, respect isn't worth chasing if it only comes when people think you're rich." Vanessa nodded slowly, swallowing her pride. "You're right." Evelyn gave a polite smile, not cold, not cruel, just enough to signal the conversation was over. Vanessa stepped back, her posture a little less confident now. She turned and walked away, her friends following silently behind her. Around the room, others watched in quiet awe. No one else dared to approach Evelyn with false flattery. The power dynamic had shifted completely, not because she demanded it, but because she embodied it. She hadn't needed a designer gown to command respect. She didn't flaunt her success. She didn't even raise her voice. And yet, with just a few words and the strength of her character, Evelyn had turned the entire evening on its head. The guests wouldn't forget the moment, not because of the donation, but because of the woman behind it. As the gala drew to a close, the once vibrant energy of the ballroom had shifted into a thoughtful calm. The crowd slowly thinned, guests giving polite goodbyes, handshakes, and the occasional nervous glance toward Evelyn Hart. The woman whose quiet presence had transformed the evening into something far more memorable than anyone had expected. Evelyn remained composed, even as whispers and sideways glances followed her. She didn't seem concerned with who was watching. She had come for a cause, contributed generously, and carried herself with unwavering grace. Staff members respectfully approached, to thank her not for the money but for her humility. Several of them shared how rare it was to see someone of her status treat people with such quiet dignity. She accepted their gratitude with a kind smile, asking their names and shaking their hands. Meanwhile, across the ballroom, something else had shifted. Conversations were quieter now, reflective. Some guests, particularly those who had been quick to judge or slow to show kindness, began reassessing their behavior. One older gentleman, a longtime donor, approached Evelyn near the exit. "I've been coming to these events for over 20 years, he said, "but tonight was the first time I felt like someone actually reminded us why we're here." Evelyn nodded. "It's easy to forget," she said gently, "but when giving becomes performance, it loses its meaning." He smiled and extended his hand. "Thank you for the reminder." As Evelyn exited the ballroom, she paused briefly at the door, taking one last glance at the glittering room behind her. Not with regret, not with judgment, but with clarity. She had once believed that success meant being accepted by rooms like that. Now she knew better. True success wasn't about being seen. It was about standing tall when others try to shrink you. She stepped outside into the cool night air, leaving behind the chandeliers champagne and shallow admiration. Her driver opened the door to the same modest car she had arrived in, and without fanfare she slipped inside and disappeared into the night. Inside the ballroom, the silence lingered. People weren't just thinking about Evelyn. They were thinking about themselves, about how easily they had judged, how quickly they had dismissed someone based on appearance alone. Some felt shame, others felt inspired, but no one left unchanged. In the days that followed, word of the gala and the mysterious, quietly powerful woman at its center spread quickly. Articles were written, blogs speculated, but the core message stayed the same. Don't judge by appearances and never underestimate quiet strength. Evelyn Hart became a name whispered not with envy, but with admiration. She didn't just change the evening, she changed the standard, and, for those who had laughed at her, mocked her, or dismissed her, she left them with something far more valuable than money. A lesson in humility, a glimpse of true class, and a reminder that the richest people in the room aren't always the loudest ones.